I've been a professor of religious studies for nearly 25 years. I've guided students through ancient scripture, exorcism rites, and obscure theology. But nothing ever shook me. Not really. Until a text I studied and deliberately buried found its way back into my life, back into my classroom, back into the hands of two students who had no idea what they were inviting in. I'm not the kind of man anyone writes stories about. I'm divorced, have one daughter, she's in college now, halfway across the country. We talk occasionally, she sends more pictures of her dog than she does of herself. I live alone, I grade papers, I teach, and I read. It's all quite predictable. My final seminar was a course I'd taught dozens of times before, Early Ritual and Hearsay in the Christian World. Over the years, it became clear that many students signed up for my course expecting to coast. Some light reading, the occasional essay, a free elective that sounded mysterious enough to be interesting. I stopped taking it personally after a while. You can't expect everyone to care about 4th century hearsays. So my classroom was often quiet, detached, half-hearted discussions and presentations stitched together the night before. But Dan and Clara were different. From the first week, they asked questions no one else thought to ask. They challenged my lectures, respectfully but sharply. They weren't there to get a grade. They were looking for something. They were curious, truly curious. If I'm being honest, they reminded me of myself. Midway through the term, I assigned the final project. A semester-long research paper to be done in pairs. Each group was expected to explore a specific ritual, practice, or theological controversy and analyze its historical, cultural, and spiritual implications. For most students, it was just another academic hurdle, mostly recycled topics from previous years. But the day after I announced the assignment, Dan and Clara stayed behind after class. "Professor, we want to do something different. Something real, something no one else has touched." There was no irony in their tone, no trace of grade-chasing desperation. They were sincere, the kind of sincerity you rarely see in students anymore. And for a moment, I felt proud. I told myself this was why I stayed in the field, why I kept teaching, even when the classrooms grew quieter and quieter every day. So despite every instinct telling me not to, I made them an offer. "There is one subject," I said, "but it's obscure. You won't find much on it. The research will be difficult, and what you do find won't come from the university library." They looked intrigued, even excited. I hesitated, then pulled out a slim folder from a locked drawer in my office. A few aged photocopies, a page of handwritten translation notes, and a transcript I'd typed myself over 20 years ago. "This is all I have," I told them. "It's incomplete, and I make no promises that you'll be able to build a coherent thesis from it." Clara reached for the folder, but I held it a moment longer. "And one more thing," I said. "No one, not even your classmates, not other faculty, no one can know I gave this to you." They agreed. And just like that, Maleficia Tenebri was back in circulation. By the time the next class rolled around, I was already questioning my decision. It had been years, decades since I'd last touched those documents, and even then I was warned. Do not circulate, do not cite, and above all, do not attempt to translate further. That warning hadn't come from regular peers. It came from a Vatican scholar whose name I was told to never write down. And now I handed pieces of that ritual to two students. Bright, yes, but still young, still untested. I was packing up my bag after class. I hadn't even heard them walk up. "Professor?" Daniel said. His voice was quiet, but there was an urgency to it. Clara stood beside him, arms folded tightly, eyes sunken and glassy. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Neither of them did. "We've been going through the material," Clara said, "and it's incredible. There's so much more to this than we thought." Daniel leaned in. "We need more. Anything else you have. Anything at all." I froze for a second, keys still in my hand. Something was off. Their energy wasn't just curious. It was charged. Fixated. Obsession, I've found, has a look to it, and I was looking right at it. In fact, their energy reminded me of a few colleagues in the Vatican who spent their entire lives researching similar topics. "I gave you everything I had," I said carefully. "There's not much more, and frankly, what's left isn't safe to read without context." "But it's not a test," Clara said almost too quickly. "It's something else, isn't it?" I looked at them for a long moment. They weren't asking as students anymore. They were asking as true researchers. I lowered my voice. "The Malficia Tenebri is not an exorcism rite, despite what it pretends to be. It was used during early witch trials, not to cast demons out, but to call them forth. To test the accused. The idea was, if someone answered, the person was guilty." Daniel blinked. "So it's a summoning ritual?" "No, not quite. It's bait." They didn't speak. I adjusted my bag, trying to end the conversation. "That's all I know. I'm glad to see this has sparked your curiosity, and I can't wait for the final paper." I paused briefly, looking back at them. "And make sure you're getting enough sleep." I walked out without waiting for a reply, but even in the hallway, I could still feel their eyes on me. The next day, class was different. I noticed it the second I walked in. Daniel and Clara, who had sat beside each other every session since week 1, were now on opposite sides of the room. Daniel sat near the back, hoodie up and eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't take out his notebook, didn't look at anyone. His foot tapped over and over, compulsively. But it was Clara who drew my attention. She was seated near the front, hunched low, scribbling furiously in her notebook before I'd even said a word. Her skin had lost its warmth somehow, pale, almost gray in the shadows. Her eyes were sunken, like she hadn't slept. Her lips were cracked, fingertips stained with what looked like black ink. And her smile, she wasn't smiling at anyone, she was smiling at her paper. When the lecture ended, students filtered out slowly. Daniel left without looking up from his shoes or making eye contact. Clara stayed behind for a moment, still scribbling, until finally closing her notebook. She stood up and walked out, leaving the page open. I waited until the door shut behind her, then I approached her desk. What she had been writing wasn't notes. It wasn't even language. The page was covered in symbols, drawn over and over, layer upon layer, like she was trying to etch them into the desk. I felt cold immediately. I knew those markings. I'd seen them once, in a redacted appendix at the back of the Vatican case files. Symbols not meant for translation. The archivist who showed them to me called them keys without locks, although I didn't understand what that meant at the time. "Don't look too long," he warned. "They're not just decorative." And now, here they were, in a spiral-bound notebook in my classroom. Clara should not have known these. No one should. I don't know what compelled me to follow her, but my gut was telling me something. Telling me something was wrong, off, even dangerous. I followed far enough back to make sure she wouldn't notice me. She walked with purpose, hood up, arms at her side, book bag clutched tightly to her chest like it was scripture. It was overcast, the kind of heavy gray that flattens everything. The rain came in sharp, misty sheets, stinging against my skin. She didn't flinch, didn't slow, just kept walking, out past the library, down the side path students sometimes use as a shortcut. Then she turned, not toward the campus housing though, towards the woods. There's a patch of forest behind the university grounds, a thick unkept stretch that borders the edge of the athletic fields. No trails. She stepped into the woods like she'd done it 100 times. I paused at the edge, listening. All I could hear was the rain tapping on the leaves, the wind cutting through the trees. Clara had vanished into the dense forest. For a moment I stood there, soaking wet, feeling utterly ridiculous. A 50-something academic chasing a student through the woods because of some symbols on a notebook, and yet my stomach turned again. Not nausea, but nerves. I barely remember the walk back to my car. The whole drive home my mind spiraled, a tangle of thoughts I couldn't untie. The woods, Clara's eyes, the silence. No explanation held up, and yet I found myself reaching for all of them. Fatigue, hallucination, stress, anything but what I knew. At home, I didn't even take off my coat. I poured myself a scotch, more than I usually would, and sat down at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop, intending to pull up my old notes, the original scans, something to confirm the symbols Clara had drawn, to prove, somehow, that they didn't mean what I thought they meant. But before I could open the files, the notifications started. 5 new messages, all from Daniel. Each one had the same subject line. We need to talk. Please. Urgent. The timestamps were spaced out one every hour, starting just after class. I hadn't even had time to click the first email when there was a knock at the door. A hard, urgent knock. Not the kind you'd use for a friendly visit. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, soaked to the bone, hoodie clinging to him. His breath was fast and shallow. His eyes were wide, unfocused. He looked like he'd run through the storm. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He didn't hesitate. I grabbed a towel from the hall closet and handed it to him. He didn't thank me, just clutched it in both hands like it might keep him from coming apart. He sat on the edge of the couch, dripping rainwater into the carpet. I sat across from him, heart still pounding. "What happened?" I asked. "What's going on?" He shook his head, slow at first. "It's her," he said. "Clara. She's not..." He trailed off. "She's not what?" I pressed. His eyes flicked up to mine. He sat there for a long time, silent, towel still clutched, shaking in his hands. I let the silence stretch. Sometimes the truth needs space to claw its way out. Finally, he spoke again. "We found more." I said nothing, just waited. "Not in the stuff you gave us," he continued, "from other sources, forums, scans. There was this guy online who claimed to have translated sections that were burned from the original text. Clara tracked him down." He swallowed hard. "She was obsessed. She started staying up all night copying the symbols by hand, trying to complete the ritual. Said it wasn't just a test, that it was a map. And she thought if we followed it, it would do something. Something real. Said we'd understand it, that we could make a serious breakthrough, a discovery. Something so monumental it would exceed just the perfect grade in your class. We'd have our research published and cited by scholars around the globe. Hell, maybe even by the Vatican itself." I felt my jaw tighten. "And you went along with it?" He nodded barely and then paused. "What happened?" At first, nothing. Just silence. We thought it failed. She seemed disappointed, and I left. He gripped the towel a little tighter. The next day she texted me, said she needed to show me something. When I got there, she was different. Not just tired, like physically different. Her voice was off. She kept saying things in Latin, I think, and I didn't recognize them. I leaned forward, and then he hesitated. I found her standing in the bathroom mirror, talking to her own reflection. But it wasn't mimicking her, it was speaking back, asking questions. "What kind of questions?" I said. He looked up, eyes shining with terror. It asked what she was willing to give up. His words hung in the room and my blood ran cold. "That's when I knew," Daniel said. "This sounds crazy, Professor," shaking his head. "I think she's a witch. Not like fairy tales, no broomsticks. Something older. She must have found out what the ritual was days before she filled me in. She was using me to finish it. And now I think it's done." Suddenly the house shook. A deafening crack split the air. Lightning, impossibly close, followed immediately by a deep concussive crash from the backyard. Daniel jumped to his feet. What the hell was that? I was already moving, heart slamming in my chest, adrenaline overriding every rational thought. We pushed through the sliding glass door, rain hitting our faces like needles as we stumbled onto the deck. And then we saw it. A massive tree branch, thick as a torso, lay splintered in the middle of the yard, engulfed in flames. But it wasn't the fire that froze us. It was the ground beneath it. Burned into the soaked grass, blackened and steaming, was a massive symbol. One I hadn't seen in decades. One I had prayed I'd never see again. A circle with 3 jagged arcs. A vertical line cleaving through it. I whispered without thinking. "It is done." Daniel looked at me, his face pale. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer, because then another bolt of lightning split the sky, this one arcing directly into the woods at the edge of the property. For a second, the world went white, and in that second she was there, Clara. Floating 10 feet above the tree line, her hair plastered to her face, soaked dress clinging to her body like ritual robes. Her mouth wide open in amusement and power, her eyes all black, and from her throat came a deep echoing laugh that wasn't hers. Daniel screamed, and I couldn't move. Clara raised a hand toward us, slow and deliberate, like she was choosing. And then, in a voice that split the air like thunder, she spoke a phrase that I hadn't heard since Rome. A sealed Vatican passage, untranslated, forbidden. "Let the body arrive and remain within me," in Latin. The flames before us surged higher. The ground itself trembled. And then, in an instant, she shot off toward the sky. The fire died and the rain stopped. Complete silence. Clara was free. She was loose. Hey everyone, just wanted to say thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you're enjoying the videos so far. If you are enjoying the content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It really means a lot and it helps so much. Alright, thanks again and we'll see you next time. Cheers.